Welcome to the Journal. We'll begin this new year with some of our favorite headlines from the old. They're all from The Onion. Yes, The Onion. This newspaper of humor remains the most reliable over-the-counter relief for the blues. We journalists can sometimes be vultures, plucking morsels from a collapsing civilization. It can be a depressing job. So take it from me. When you're down in the dumps, The Onion offers a mood-altering experience that's completely legal and guaranteed to lift your spirits at least until the next bulletin from the Middle East, the White House, or Congress. Here are some of the paper's best headlines of '08 as selected by a panel of Journal judges jealous of The Onion's skill with the scalpel of satire. The best political headline came from Wasilla, Alaska. Area woman becomes Republican vice presidential candidate. A close second from Washington, D.C. Lincoln Memorial seems more relaxed following Obama victory. Elsewhere, $700 billion bailout celebrated with lavish $800 billion executive party. GM covered with giant tarp until it has money to work on cars again. American Airlines now charging fees to non-passengers. Factual error found on internet. China recalls everything. Housing crisis vindicates guy who still lives with parents. And in the wisdom of our judges, The Onion magazine's cover of the year. Homeland Security Chief Michael Chertoff, quote, "Everyone was close to dying only 7 times this year." Nowadays, it's hard to tell The Onion from the straight press. How many times a week do you read or hear a story and think, this has to be a joke? Take this week's story, Chip Saltzman. Saltzman wants to be chairman of the Republican National Committee, and he's been touting himself for the job by circulating a CD that includes the song Barack the Magic Negro. That's the tune made famous on Rush Limbaugh's minstrel show, as sung by an Al Sharpton impersonator.
Oh, Barack the Magic Negro lives in D.C. The L.A. Times, they called him that 'cause he's black but not authentically.
When I read that story, I naturally suspected The Onion was putting us on to recommend yourself to fellow Republicans by sending them Barack the Magic Negro. Surely only The Onion could concoct something so bizarre. But the story turns out to be true, and Saltzman is counting on it working in his favor as he seeks to be the savior of his party. Who's to say it won't work? Then there's the circus starring Governor Rod Blagojevich and his fellow Democrats. The governor's still in office, despite allegations that he offered to sell Barack Obama's vacated Senate seat to the highest bidder. This week, Blagojevich announced that, arrest or no arrest, he's appointing a veteran Illinois politician, Roland Burris, to the job. But Senate Democrats in Washington are saying, over our dead bodies. And speaking of dead bodies, Burris has already placed a monument in the local cemetery that proclaims his accomplishments, with room left to add his tenure in the Senate. Memo to my friends at The Onion, you can't make this kind of thing up. The senators say anyone Blagojevich names will be tainted by the circumstances. But hold on. Isn't what he's doing just another version of how the Senate itself does business? And the House, too. Except that when money changes hands on Capitol Hill, it's not called a bribe. It's called a campaign contribution. That, as The Onion might say, is the biggest joke of all. Meanwhile, President Bush is racing against the clock to polish his legacy for posterity. In an interview the other day on ABC News, he claimed credit for trouncing al-Qaeda in Iraq. Journalist Martha Raddatz promptly reminded him there were no al-Qaeda in Iraq until he invaded the country, whereupon our president replied,
"Yeah, that's right. So what?"
There you have it, our own judge's choice of the defining quote of '08 and the mantra of the Bush years. The facts don't matter, so what? So bring on The Onion and Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert and Doonesbury and all the others who channel Mark Twain, Ambrose Bierce, and Will Rogers, reminding us that as we live in the twilight zone of politics between reality and parody, we're really living in America's 51st state, the state of Fredonia. That's right, Fredonia, the make-believe country imagined by the Marx Brothers in their classic comedy, Duck Soup. The parallels with the soup we're in are notable, even if the movie is older than I am. It hit the theater 75 years ago, in 1933, an era like ours of calamity, chicanery, and peril. The Great Depression gripped America. Franklin Delano Roosevelt had just been elected president and would soon launch the New Deal, while in Germany, Adolf Hitler was named chancellor. As all of this was happening, the four Marx Brothers, that's right, there were four of them then, shot a slapstick comedy that almost inadvertently transcended slapstick, becoming a trenchant send-up of power and vanity. As Duck Soup begins, the nation of Fredonia is bankrupt. Sound familiar? And is asking for a bailout. Familiar indeed.
Mrs. Teasdale.
Yes, Your Excellency?
I again ask you to reconsider.
Gentlemen, I've already loaned Fredonia more than half the fortune my husband left me. I consider that money lost. And now you're asking for another $20 million.
$20 million? Chump change on Wall Street today. And anyway, Mrs. Teasdale has real change in mind.
In a crisis like this, I feel Fredonia needs a new leader. A progressive, fearless fighter. A man like Rufus T. Firefly.
Rufus T. Firefly.
Rufus T. Firefly is played by Groucho Marx.
The last man nearly ruined this place. He didn't know what to do with it. If you think this country's bad off now, just wait till I get through with it.
He might just as easily be leading his cabinet in consideration of a $700 billion bailout proposed by Henry Paulson.
All right, meeting's call to order.
Your Excellency, here's the Treasury Department's report. I hope you'll find it clear.
Clear? Why, a 4-year-old child could understand this report. Run out and find me a 4-year-old child. I can't make head or tail out of it.
Firefly's impatience with diplomacy is familiar, too.
I'd be only too happy to meet Ambassador Trentino and offer him on behalf of my country the right hand of good fellowship. And I feel sure that he will accept this gesture in the spirit in which it is offered. But suppose he doesn't? A fine thing that'll be. I hold out my hand and he refuses to accept it. That'll add a lot to my prestige, won't it? Me, the head of a country, snubbed by a foreign ambassador. Who does he think he is, that he can come here and make a sap out of me in front of all my people? Think of it. I hold out my hand, and that hyena refuses to accept it. Why, the cheap, ball-flushing swine, he'll never get away with it, I tell you. He'll never get away with it. So, you refuse to shake hands with me, eh?
Mrs. Teasdale, this is the last straw. There's no turning back now. This means war.
The smoking gun becomes a mushroom cloud, so to speak.
And it's war! And it's war! Gather the forces! Harness the horse!
And right on cue, like Pavlov's dog watching cable news, his generals and the flag-waving, rabble-roused public sign on.
At last we're going to freedom on the streets of war. We're going to war. At last the country's going to war. It seems the country's going to war. At last the country's going to war.
Gentlemen, this is the last straw. Where's my Stradivari?
Silly? Yes, it was silly. But audiences laughed and laughed until they laughed Duck Soup right into the Comedy Hall of Fame and beyond. It's now seen as one of the great anti-war comedies of all time, right up there with Charlie Chaplin's The Great Dictator and Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove. It wasn't easy to laugh in those days. Civilization really was collapsing into the chaos of global depression and war. But audiences, my parents' generation, found some relief in those darkened theaters from the grim specter waiting outside. As for today, well, although our situation doesn't seem as desperate as the one they faced, our entire system does seem to be dissolving all around us, right into thin air. Our own chuckles compete with the sound of renewed violence in the Middle East, melting glaciers sliding into the sea, and champagne glasses shattering on the gold bricks of Wall Street. We can use all the humor we can muster. The 18th century playwright Beaumarchais, who doubled as a politician, gives us a clue as to why. I quickly laugh at everything, he said, for fear of having to cry. This from a man who managed to survive the French Revolution. So, Happy New Year, but keep your fingers crossed.